Hi, everybody. This is Andy Couturier with theopening.org, and today's talk is about questions you can ask your beta readers, BETA, people who are taking a first look at your manuscript after you've finished a draft of it, but are not really ready to show it to a wider world. But these are people you have selected who can give you some feedback. So I want to give you some pointers on ways that you can go about that. First of all, I want to talk about who you should choose and who not to choose. I want to talk about the format that you might want to get your feedback in, give you some options on that, give you a few cautions about the ways that this could go wrong and try to avoid them, and then some questions you might want to ask your reader. And I'll share some of my own experience getting feedback on the draft of my novel. Okay, so first of all, the most important thing is to not randomly choose anybody to be your beta reader. You really want someone who knows how to listen. To listen meaning to take instructions, to listen to what you've asked them for and take those directions and not just do whatever the hell they felt they should do. And the reason I stress this is because we have a culture of critiqueology. Feedback is not critique. Feedback could include critique if you want it, but it does not presuppose that me telling you what your piece needs or what's wrong with it is the best and proper way to do it. So there is a culture, and unfortunately I think it's a little bit more common among men to say, well, you know what your problem is? What you need to do is have 3 more characters and move it faster or move it slower or add more concrete specific details or introduce, here's one I heard recently, in the first 10 pages, you must always have a character who is not the main character introduce the main theme of the novel, otherwise it's not a working novel. That may be an overstatement, but I did actually hear that from someone who's in a program. Might be an interesting idea, but does every novel have to have a non-main character in the first 10 pages to introduce a theme that is the theme, that there should always be one theme? This is a proscriptive, proscriptive way to approach giving people feedback. I know the proper way that your book should be written, and I'm going to tell you because I learned it and I have decided it. And the problem is that the world doesn't work that way. A building, this wall, it might work that way. Gravity goes straight down, and if a wall is tilted this way or tilted that way, it's going to fall down, and there is a right way to make a wall, and it has to be straight plumb. Repairing a gasket on a car, if you do not do it properly, the gasket will blow, the engine could blow up. However, a building and a car are incredibly simple compared to a piece of writing. A piece of writing is based in human discourse. It's based in the billions of brain cells that we each have. It's based in tens of thousands of years of culture. It's based in an incredibly complex system called language that people don't ever really fully understand, that is vague, that's only made of 26 letters of the alphabet. It is unbelievably complex, and if you want to start taking some linguistics courses and start to realize the structure of language, you will be blown away at the complexity there. So there is no way for someone to tell you the way your novel needs to be, or your way your poem needs to be, or your piece of nonfiction needs to be. So a piece of writing cannot need something. Unfortunately, as I said, we have this culture in which everyone says, okay, I need to tell you what's wrong with it and I need to fix it, and it's a critique, criticize, tell you what's wrong. And they don't realize that it's idiosyncratic to their particular opinion, and they end up, particularly if you are a new writer or you're susceptible, many of us are, to these kinds of critique fests, you either stop writing, which is a disaster, or you write it according to 10 different people's opinions, or you kind of jerk right, you jerk left, you do this thing, that thing because this person told you to do it, the other person did it, or this little fear that you had bores into your brain. So back to, you want someone who can listen to you. That's so important. So if you are asking for a specific kind of feedback, and we're going to get to that, you want that person to be able to give you that kind of feedback and not the other kind of feedback that you don't necessarily want. Now, you've been warned, so you can do whatever you want to, obviously, but a lot of times people end up getting this harsh criticism that ends up eating into their brain like a bookworm, and they become paralyzed, or they end up, being told that they have to have a lot of concrete specific details. So they fill their book with concrete specific details. They lard it in with every feather and every, cuticle and every, flowery emotion, whatever, because someone told them they had to do it, as opposed to listening to what it was that they were really trying to do and trying to figure out what they were trying to do. So you want your readers to help you figure out what you really wanted to have happen, not to give you instructions. I know it would be so much nicer for someone to say, you know what, this really just needs a head gasket and a fan belt and a rotor, and you'll be on your way. That would be a great thing if writing worked that way. However, that's not the way great writing works, and it's a mystery as to how it works, and no one really knows. So, how do you do this? I'm going to get to the long-term purpose of this in a second, but let me stay with my outline here. So your format is how you get people to read it. You can send it to people electronically, or you can send it to them on paper. I think it makes a difference. I had my novel, 580 pages. I printed it up. I spent the money at the copy shop. I had it not hand-bound, I had it, bound, physically bound, and I ended up giving it to 7 readers. I chose those readers very carefully, but I thought it was important for them to have it on paper so that they could work on it, so that it wasn't just another file on their computer. It's just not another thing. If the person's far away and you can't afford it or whatever, you can do what you want to do. And there's certain people who only like to work electronically, and you can work that out with them. But I think there's a lot to be said for actually having a book on paper, because people perceive things differently when they're looking at a screen. They miss mistakes when they're looking at a screen. They scan over, they misread things. It's just much more difficult to do that when it's on paper. You want to have a variety of readers. So I'm going to use my novel as an example, since I did this recently. Mine's an ecological adventure novel, which has a lot of multi-ethnic characters and is kind of a crazy romp. But there's also an aspect in which the main character goes through his own development, and he's a young man, and it's sort of in the tradition of what's known in, it's a German word called Bildungsroman, I think I'm pronouncing that properly, meaning coming-of-age story. So I chose, one of my readers was a young person who has read a ton of coming-of-age stories, way more than I have. Another person, there's a lot of political content in it. He reads politics all the time. He's a very sophisticated reader. I chose him. There's an environmental aspect to it. I have an environmental scientist. There's a ton of science in it. Wanted her to read that for anything that was totally crazy and out there. I have a number of ethnically Chinese characters in my novel, and some of them are good guys and bad guys. Yes, it's an old school novel with good guys and bad guys. And I wanted to make sure, as a non-Chinese person, that there wasn't, I wanted to ask if there's anything offensive or culturally problematic, so I chose a politically astute and aware Chinese-American reader who gave me great feedback. Also, I had somebody who'd spent a long time in a Master's of Fine Arts, so I kind of wanted the literary world. The point is not just one reader or even 2 readers. You want at least 3 people to read it. 3 people will actually read it, so you might want to give it to 4 or 5, so you actually make sure that you get 3 people who've read it. And that those 3 people be different from each other. Because the problem is you could get one person saying, oh my god, that part is just perfect, don't change a word, but everyone else doesn't think so, and you really have to make those decisions on your own. So that gets to the point of when you get feedback that is troubling or you're not really sure about it, how do you know whether to listen to it or not? And that's the key thing is can you listen not just to them, but more importantly, to yourself? It's a mindfulness approach. How much can you think about what you were trying to do with this piece of writing? How much can you tune in to your initial intention? It may be as subtle as a whiff of incense smoke. It may be as oblique as a form a figure off in the woods far away, but it's a very important thing to think about whether that person's feedback, when you get it, relieves you, gives you a great idea, a burst of energy, or whether it militates against everything you've ever tried to do in your writing, or what you're trying to do with this piece of writing. And I think it's incredibly important to not just be swayed by people telling you to turn right, turn off, turn right, turn left, and to really listen in when you get that feedback, sit on it, feel it, and make your decisions based on that ineffable but incredibly important sense of what this piece of writing is trying to be, or what something inside of you is trying to make it, as opposed to a bunch of rules about what the piece needs to be. Okay, so I guess the way to repeat that is just don't give over your power. Your power is what makes it a good piece of writing. You need your power. Don't give it away. So you may have a lot of questions about your writing. And these are things that you've thought about as you've worked on it. You've worked on it, you 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 worked on it. But no matter how long you've been at it, you still feel like, I'm not sure about whether this section has too much theory in it. I'll give you an example. Most novels don't have a lot of theory in it. I understand that that's thought of as bad by a lot of literary people, that things should be revealed, that they should be clued in, but you're not supposed to have long lectures by people. Well, that's not the kind of novel I wanted to have. However, I don't know exactly how much theory people are going to put up with. And I tried to cloak the theory. I tried to make it into conversation. I tried to make it mysterious. I tried to make it, it's ecological theory, and it's something about theater and about puppetry and poetry, and it's all mixed together. But it's one person giving you a talk. That's the kind of novel I wanted to have. So in my questions, which I wrote up a list of questions. I said, how much did you feel comfortable with that? Did it bog you down? Did it get bogged down for you? And I really wanted to know that. Now, that's a critical question. I'm asking, tell me yes or no. Did you get bogged down? Okay, so what is your intention in doing it? And you have to think about what that intention is. I had a bunch of other questions I had. These are also negative questions, but I was ready for that because I'd already gone through the novel several times. I'd read it through. I was ready for having those answers. Was there anything that was objectionable culturally? Did anything seem racist or culturally appropriating to you? Did any characterization seem unbelievable? One of the big questions that came up for me was, do the characters sound too much like each other? Do these particular 3 or 4 characters sound all the same? Does another character sound too much like me, Andy? I didn't want the narrator to sound like me, Andy. I wanted the character to sound like Mike. So I wanted people to answer that question. So I wrote down those questions, and I actually printed that up too and stapled it and put it inside. Now, not everybody answered that, so that when I got the feedback, I looked over to make sure that those questions were answered. Now, sometimes people didn't want to, but I did want to just check with them. Like, hey, did you find these 3 or 4 characters too similar to each other or not? So I would say this is an important part of the process is to, once you get your feedback, is to make sure that that characterization has been, that question has been addressed, if the person is able to do so. In a more general sense, I always want to know what people's feelings were, where they responded emotionally, where they were curious, where did they want to know more. That doesn't mean that just every time everyone wants to know more, because that's an easy thing to say, oh, tell me more, I'm curious about it. Doesn't mean that my novel needs that. But I do want to know what their desires are, and their guesses at what they think is going to happen. I had to decide whether I wanted suggestions or not. So again, this gets back to whether someone is going to listen to you or not. So what suggestions are you open to? For me, I was able to ask those questions personally. So if something did come up and I wanted someone's suggestions, I could ask them for it. Again, I believe in some intentionality around this. So that people can, be guided and not just be tossed into the deep end and say, well, just tell me what you want, because you'll get some random stuff that you might not have gotten had you had too much intentionality. But on the other hand, you might not get the key questions you have answered. I think it's also important to tell people what you don't want. So I have my partner Cynthia reads my manuscripts over for grammatical problems. So I didn't need every one of those 6 or 7 readers to look for grammatical problems. I mean, some people going along, they see a missing word, they circle it. That's fine. But I didn't need someone to give a close grammatical read. And I've actually studied a lot of grammar. And so for me, that's not a particular issue. So I didn't want them to waste a lot of time and energy, to be considerate of them. And I also didn't want to be bogged down with discussions as to whether their grammar rules are more correct than my grammar rules. So I said, don't need that. Another couple things you might want to say is that you don't want their judgments. So perhaps it's a memoir. Perhaps the character at 22 years old did something incredibly heinous, and that has something to do with what you did, and you're not proud of it in any way, but you're writing the memoir to be that way. You don't really necessarily want people's judgments on it. However, on the other hand, you might be revealing some things about yourself that could have effects on your job. It could have some effects on your life, about the way people see you. And you might want your readers to say, hey, do you think it's a bad idea for me to reveal this heinous thing that I did when I was 22 years old? You can ask that, and it's good to run it by a few people. Or I'm revealing this thing about my brother, what he did. He's still alive, and I'm not even talking to the guy. I'm mad at him because of this horrible thing he did to me, and I'm about to publish the damn thing. What do you think? You can get that kind of feedback, but you have to want it, and I think you should be clear to your readers whether you do or don't want it. I also caution people against psychoanalysis, even if you're a therapist, but you probably don't need to know that if you're a therapist, because you don't just randomly offer your opinions to people who aren't asking them for them. But a lot of other people do. They say, you're really on a control trip, or I don't think you have really conquered this issue, or all that stuff. That is not what you're inviting necessarily. That doesn't mean if you publish it, you're not going to get that kind of feedback from the public, and you have to be ready for that. But it may not be what you want from your beta readers. And I think, the most important thing is when you're getting ready to have your work read by your beta readers is to really notice what are those niggling questions for you. And some of them you just want to get cleared out of the way. So I have one character in my novel, and she's almost like a superhero. She's just totally amazing. She doesn't learn anything through the process because she already appears on the scene as this goddess of intelligence, wisdom. She's a teacher, and I wanted to know, was that a particular problem? I have a lot of monkeys in animals, and I have not studied primatology. I am not an expert in differences between lesser apes and greater apes and monkeys and chimpanzees, and it wasn't really that important for me in writing the novel, but I did want to know whether readers felt that that was, I needed to research that more. So I had a flash forward where we jump forward in time and come back. Did you get lost there? Please notice on page 17 to page 23, there's a flash forward. We don't pick that up until page 300. Was that okay for you? Those are the kind of questions you can ask from your beta readers. But to sum up, be sure that you get more than 3 or 4 readers. Make sure that those readers are likely to do it and that they're actually know how to take directions, that they're not based in a tear it down and tell you what's wrong with it at school. And those people who do so are not always necessarily trying to hurt you. They're just doing their best to help in the only way maybe that they know how, or the only way that they think is effective. Because sugarcoating is never any good. You have to tell it like it is, as if I knew it like it is. One more thing I should say. There's this idea of a straight underline under a phrase that you really like, or a double straight underline, you loved it, or a squiggly underline about a part that confused you or was tripped you up, or syntactically awkward, or you weren't sure what it meant, or maybe those straight lines and squiggly lines can be horizontal in the side of the page, and to say like this whole paragraph, I just didn't know where it was going. Again, only that you only ask for that when you're really ready for it. And if you think I've overemphasized that a little bit, please allow me to tell a short story, which happened in a writing class years ago. I had several people in the class, but I'll focus on two people. One woman was writing a story in the third person about a 3-year-old little girl. And the 3-year-old little girl had all of these angry and violent fantasies as she's sitting by the fireside, and she wants to poke out the eyes, and she's got all this aggression. And so she handed the piece out to everyone in the group, and I said, hey, are there things you don't want? She's like, no, tell me anything at all. And I said, well, are you sure you want that? I mean, maybe people, she's like, nope, tell me what's wrong. I just need to know what's wrong. I was like, okay. Well, one guy in the class had he'd never had any kids himself. He just babysat for his niece. His niece was a 3-year-old little girl, and she was so sweet. She was so nice. She was just cute and lovely. And so he said to the writer, that was unbelievable. I didn't think a 3-year-old would ever think that. I don't know where you came up with that, but I thought it was like completely wrong to put those kind of horrible thoughts into the head of a cute little 3-year-old girl. Well, it turns out that the writer was writing in the third person about thoughts that she herself had when she was 3 years old. It was absolutely accurate to the way she thought and felt at the time. And frankly, she was like, oh my God, I didn't want to hear that. That really upset me. It didn't actually work to help me. I put this piece aside and never looked at it again. It was terrible. I mean, I didn't want to say like I warned you, but I just think about the kinds of feedback that you're ready to hear. And if you're not ready for it yet, the most important thing for you is to keep writing. So your beta readers got to encourage you to keep writing. Last thing I'll say is when you get your feedback, take good notes when you're talking to them. Don't fight with them if they're giving you some of the feedback orally. Just say yes, yes, and keep taking notes, because if you say, start fighting with them, wait a minute, what I meant by that is that will be one of the last things your reader will tell you, because they think, oh, I'm not going to give them any more feedback, even if you totally disagree with that person. Smile and keep taking notes. Let them know that you are glad that you are giving them feedback. Now, if you're confused, go ahead and ask them, I'm sorry, you just said something there I didn't quite understand. Did you mean A or B? No problem. But you want to really make them feel that you are so glad that they've taken the time and energy to give you that feedback. And try to take as good notes as you can when you have that conversation. Perhaps even record it, because there's a lot of stuff that's coming at you and you're thinking a lot of things and you might miss a lot. And so you want to get as much as possible out of the generous reading that the person has given you. Okay, again, my name is Andy Couturier, and the website is theopening.org. We have lots of writing classes and retreats and online courses and free materials. So check out the site, and I hope this was a useful talk to you. Have a great time, and feel free to email me, andy@theopening.org, with any other issues you'd like me to bring up in future talks. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.